Greetings, warlords. Welcome to Saga Thursday. I'm your host, Rodge. Today we will learn how to cast spells in the age of magic. So I've got my bookmarks here spread across three sections. You have the actual sorcerer's profile. You've got a section on casting magic spells, the actual rules, and these lovely, lovely dice. And then you have the actual spells at the end of the book. So we'll be jumping around a little bit here. So let's talk a little bit about magic. So this could have been implemented in any number of ways. The troop types are obviously can be magical type creatures. The battle board abilities could be seen as magical, and some of them obviously are. The Lords of the Wild can turn a piece of terrain into a titan, and on the Otherworld board, they can open a portal and you can teleport units. I don't know if that's gotten out there yet, but that's a very cool ability. So obviously there's magical type stuff implemented with the boards. So you could have just had certain abilities that the wizards would have, like priests. But Alex Bouchel and Studio Tomahawk went with actual magic dice and magic spells and kind of a traditional route. Kind of reminds me of someone like maybe 6th or 7th edition of Warhammer. So, well, let's get into it right away with the sorcerers. So you can take as many of these guys as you want, but probably one will be the best bang for your buck. There is a cap on the number of magic dice that we'll use, so you cannot cast unlimited spells, but you can take one or more sorcerers. They're 1 point each. They do not generate saga dice, so keep that in mind. Armor 3 in melee, 4 against shooting, 2 attacks in melee, no shooting attacks. They do have bodyguards, determination, presence, resilience 1, and unarmed. So if you probably want to take some Hearthguards with these guys. They're kind of vulnerable, but resilience, as we know, goes a long way. And there are some defensive spells that are out there. So let's talk a little bit about the magic dice. So these are kind of reminiscent of our saga dice. I don't know if you'll be able to see these things, but they have a common side, an uncommon side, and a rare side. And there's little magical symbols on here. I don't know that these are symbols that exist anywhere out there in the world if they have names, but one kind of looks like a little plate of burning something. I don't know. A bubble bath squiggly for the uncommon, and then a dude kicking a ball for the rare. That's what I'm going to call these guys. So the magic dice, these are placed on your board at the start of your turn. So you get 1 magic dice plus 1 for every sorcerer you have, and these just kind of sit out there. And then during your turn, you'll be able to cast spells with the dice. So it's not like you're generating them immediately and you get to see if you got a rare or an uncommon, but they just kind of sit in reserve. And then when you actually cast a spell, you're going to roll the dice to see kind of what they do. So each sorcerer can select up to 3 spells, and they'll have access to 2 different kind of lores or spell types. There's light, earth, metal, time, death, and energy. And each of the factions can choose 2 of those lores, so it's specified. So like the Wild, for example, can take light and earth, I believe. Yes. So when I go into the spells, I will specify a little further which factions can get access to which. But so these dice will sit out there during your turn. When it's time to cast a spell, you will roll them. If you do not use them, they're gone. They disappear. You cannot cast spells in the enemy's turn. And so it's kind of a use them or lose them situation. So you will only need 6 magic dice to play. That's the cap. And so just keep that in mind when we're kind of talking about the spells and what's going on there. And so the idea is like one of you will have the dice and then you'll just pass it to the other guy on his turn. And then he will pass them back to you. And you guys will share the magic dice because neither of you will be able to get magic dice at the same time. So casting a spell it's tricky. It's sort of like a free activation, but it's not an activation. So it cannot be canceled with fatigues, I believe, because it's not an activation. Cannot be otherwise interacted with SAGA abilities. So it's like a free activation. It doesn't generate fatigue, I don't believe. And you can see my confidence of explanation here. Wizard cannot cast spells if they're exhausted, but otherwise they can cast up to their 3 spells. So this is different than how I understood it previously. I thought you can only do 1 spell per turn, but once I kind of went through everything in preparation for this, I read that you can cast all 3 of your spells if you have enough magic dice to do it. So how do we cast a spell? So you're going to pick your spell, and you're going to pick your number of magic dice that you want to use. And so I said that you start with 1 magic dice plus 1 for each sorcerer. And then on each battle board, there's going to be an ability to generate up to 2 more magic dice. Basically, you can trade any saga dice for a magic dice. So that's how you get up to 6. So just to clarify that. So you'll always be able to cast 1 spell, essentially, if you have the range requirements you want to do it. But you'll have to burn some saga dice to be able to cast all 3. So, okay, so you pick your spell, you pick the number of dice you want to use, and then you're going to roll them. So the example spell here is Bolt, which is from the energy lore. So choose an enemy unit within long and line of sight to your sorcerer, and if it's successful, you roll 2 dice and apply the following effects. And then there's 3 different categories here, so it corresponds to the magic dice that you roll. So there's always a base effect, which is indicated by a blank symbol. There's an optimum effect, which shows you usually you need like an uncommon to sort of unlock that. And then there's like an extreme boosted effect to the spell, a maximum effect, which if you choose to take that one, then you will have to roll on a miscast overload table, roll 2d6, and you could blow up, forget the spell. You know, it has all those classic effects. So Bolt is a 1 dice spell, so some of the spells require 2 dice to go off. So you always need to roll at least the minimum number of dice, but you can roll as many as you want. So for example, with Bolt, it's a 1 dice spell, but you could roll 4 dice, and I just rolled 4 of the common symbols here, so that's not going to help us. So the uncommon is what generates the optimum effect, and the rare is the maximum. So based off this, I will have to take the minimum effect, and that is roll 2 dice, and the targeted unit suffers a casualty for each roll that exceeds its armor against shooting attacks. So you're rolling 2 dice, so you can only cause 2 casualties here if you roll good. And I think the verbiage is pretty specific in the spells. It's actually casualties, it's not hits. So casualty just means, you know, take the model off. If you have resilience, you can spend a fatigue to cancel the casualty, but you don't get to roll defense dice. So we'll keep that in mind. Let's say I rolled 2 commons, then uncommon, and the rare, the kickball player. So you get to choose which dice effect you take. So just because I rolled a rare doesn't mean I automatically have to take the maximum effect and risk blowing up. So the wizards, they can control what they're kicking out here. So that's a really important distinction. So you'll never blow yourself up unless you want to. And some of these maximum effects are quite amazing. So on this one, it's okay. Well, let me talk about the optimum one so we can compare. So roll 2 dice, and the targeted unit suffers a casualty for each roll that matches or exceeds its armor against shooting attacks. So on the minimum effect, you have to roll higher than their armor. The optimum, it's equal to or higher the armor, so it's 1 pip. If you do the maximum effect, the targeted unit suffers a casualty for each roll of 3 or more. So rolling 2 dice. If you roll 3s or better, you'll cause a casualty. And if there's at least 1/6, the target suffers an additional casualty. So you kill up to 3 guys. If you're doing Hearth guards, that could be good. If you're going against a monster, this is a good way to put some fatigues on him before you go into close combat. So you can see the spell's pretty tame, and a lot of the attack spells are pretty tame, to be honest. You'll probably be using magic more to buff or sort of debuff the enemy. And I think that's good. You're kind of expecting just unit destroying abilities, but for the most part, you're not going to be able to really do that with magic. It's more of a support type thing. So yeah, you basically choose the result based off the dice that you have. So that's about it. Are there any notes? So the abuse of power table is you roll 2d6. So yeah, that's what's called the abuse of power. You roll 2d6, 6, 7, 8, you'll be fine. If you roll higher or lower than that, you'll forget spells. You could blow up. If you roll 2 or a 12, you know, there's going to be a radius type effect, inflicting a fatigue or a casualty on guys nearby. So if you do that, know that you want to use the boosted version of the spell, the maximum effect. You might want to clear the area a little bit. People, back up. I'm going to do some fun stuff here. So you've got your 3 spells. As long as you have magic dice, you can cast those for free activations. The sorcerer's got termination, so he's got free moves to sort of get where he wants to go. But I will say a lot of the spell ranges are quite short, especially for the buffs. So like very short. The like attack spells, effects of the enemy are just a long. So there's nothing longer than that. So you really need to be willing to get your sorcerer up into the fray. So let's talk a little bit about the various lores here. And we talked about energy already. So the spell was bolt. So I'm going to pick a spell from each one of these lores here. Domain of energy can be used by underworld, so your demons, and then the great kingdoms. So they've got 3 attack spells outright that can cause casualties to the enemy. They've got 1 debuff and then 2 buff spells. So that's the most attack spells out of any lore. So yeah, if you want to blow stuff up, potentially take the lore of energy. So domains, that's the official title for these. Domain of light. So light can be taken by the Lords of the Wild and the Great Kingdoms again. So let's talk about their stuff. So they have 3 debuff spells, 2 buffs, and then 1 sort of attack spell. So I'm going to talk about Shield of Light. So this is until the start of your next turn, your sorcerer or a friendly unit within very short gets, and then it gets 1 of these 3 things depending on what you roll. So that's kind of the format for these spells. So the minimum effect is an armor of 5 against shooting attacks. Which, okay. The optimum effect is an armor of 5 against shooting attacks and in melee. So if you are taking warriors with bows, as you'll probably be doing in the wild list, that could be handy. The optimum effect, or the maximum effect, I should say, an armor of 6 against shooting attacks and in melee. So that is pretty awesome. So one thing to keep in mind with the spells is they can work on monsters. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So I could use this to buff my behemoth, or if I had a scourge, a flying dragon type creature. So I think one main use for spells will be buffing and debuffing the monsters, because they cannot benefit from advanced, or cannot trigger advanced saga abilities, and cannot move from advanced saga abilities. But with spells, that restriction, as far as I can tell, is not in there. So some of the lores will work very nicely if you take a monster or 2. And Domain of Light, it may or may not be one of them. It's got some cool stuff in here. So that is a spell from Domain of Light. Domain of Earth is the lore of the wild again, and then the Horde can take the Domain of Earth. So I'm going to talk about transformation. So this is one of the buff spells. There's 3 buffs and then 3 sort of debuffs, which one of those can get nasty. But I'm going to talk about transformation. So this is a 1 dice spell. Until the end of the turn, the sorcerer cannot cast spells and replaces their characteristics and special rules with the ones below. So the minimum effect, the sorcerer becomes a creature of your choice. The optimum effect, the sorcerer becomes a warlord mounted on a beast. Very nice. 10 attacks, resilience 2. The maximum effect, the sorcerer becomes the monster of your choice. So that is amazing. So if you're playing the wild, not only can you use the battle board ability to turn a forest or some such into a monster, you can turn your sorcerer into a monster, and all of a sudden you have 2 monsters where there were none before. So that is really cool ability. Let's go to Domain of Death. So this is usable by the underworld and undead, naturally. So there's 3 debuffs, 3 buffs available in here. I'm going to talk about Bane. This spell's pretty cool. This is a 2 dice spell, so you have to roll at least 2 dice to get it off. Choose an enemy unit within long of the sorcerer until the start of your next turn. The minimum effect is they have to re-roll 6s after modifiers. If you do the optimum effect, which is a common and an uncommon, it suffers a -1 penalty to its attack dice. And the maximum effect is the -1 penalty to attack dice, and it counts as primitive during melee. So if it has fatigues, it'll knock down a few attacks, but the most important benefit of primitive is that's the ability that the monsters have that stops them from triggering saga abilities. So that could be really awesome. If your opponent has a full board of defensive abilities, you're like, nah, we're not going to be doing that today. So very cool. Domain of Time. So this is Under Earth and Undead. And I'm going to talk about aging because, I don't know, I like the idea of this spell. It's pretty cool. So choose a unit within long of and line of sight of the sorcerer. During the next turn, they suffer an additional fatigue after every... the minimum effect is melee. Optimum is move or charge activation. And the maximum effect is any activation. And they also suffer an additional fatigue at the end of the turn. So I just like, I don't know how useful it'll be. So obviously, if the opponent's unit doesn't activate, they won't be triggering any of this. But the idea and execution of it seemed really cool to me, like theming with aging. You know, they just get older and older and older. So that's pretty cool. Time has 3 buffs and 3 debuffs. Lastly, Domain of Metal. So this lore is pretty awesome if you can take it, which is the Under Earth and Horde. There's 5 buffs and 1 debuff. And yeah, you'll probably be casting all these if you can. So I'm going to do Stoke Fury because this one is a very cool ability. Choose a friendly unit within short during their next charge that takes place entirely across open terrain. They get at the minimum a move bonus of short, 2 a move bonus of short, and 2 bonus attack dice. And the maximum is a move bonus of short, 3 attack dice, and the charge unit suffers a fatigue after the charge is resolved. So very cool. You can definitely see how handy that'll be if you have a monster to soup that bad boy up. So those are a few of the spells available in Age of Magic. So it'll be interesting to see as we go along how people use the sorcerers. They're definitely not required. In my games, they've all been kind of handy, but I haven't had a real plan for what I wanted to do with them. So as we go along here, it'll be interesting to see how folks use them, how many take a sorcerer, how many take multiple sorcerers. I'm not sure if the value's there. I will say some of the legendary units in the game could be like Archdemon, who has, he's a big giant demon and he casts spells. So there's models like that potentially out there that could be fighty and having spells, which would obviously be quite awesome. So looking forward to delving a little bit more next week, hopefully, into the factions after this, to describe a little bit more detail about each, and then talk about their specific units, and then also their specific terrain, which I don't think I've mentioned yet, but there's some new terrain stuff in Age of Magic as well. So hopefully you were able to follow everything. If you have any questions below, go ahead and post those, and I will respond in a timely fashion, hopefully. But if you made it this far, thanks for watching, supporting, liking, all that stuff, and I'm going to catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Saga!